On the fateful day of September 12, 1942, on Guadalcanal, a contingent of 800 U.S. Marines found themselves in a precarious situation that appeared to spell their doom. Lieutenant Colonel Red Mike Edson had received credible intelligence indicating that approximately 2,500 Japanese soldiers were stealthily maneuvering through the dense jungle, with the clear intent of encircling his position on the ridge strategically located south of Henderson Field. Conventional military doctrine unequivocally dictated that when faced with such overwhelming odds, outnumbered 3-1 and staring down the barrel of encirclement, the only sensible course of action was to retreat, seek more favorable terrain, and urgently request reinforcements. However, Edson, upon assessing his weary Marines, who were running low on ammunition and had no viable escape route, made a bold decision that flew in the face of every principle ingrained in military textbooks. He issued an order for his men to consolidate their defensive perimeter, effectively inviting the enemy to close in and completely surround them. As the humid darkness enveloped the Pacific jungle, the Japanese forces advanced from 3 sides, fully expecting to crush the Americans in a swift and devastating night assault. What transpired next would shatter deeply held assumptions about defensive warfare and transform what seemed like a hopeless situation into one of the most remarkably one-sided victories in the annals of the Marine Corps. The oppressive humidity of Guadalcanal's jungle bore down on the Marines like a tangible presence as night descended upon the ridge on September 13th. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson moved deliberately through his defensive positions, his steps measured and bearing the weight of a man who had already come to terms with the cold calculations of mortality. The stark reality was that 800 Marines were pitted against a confirmed force of 2,500 Japanese troops advancing through the jungle below. The numbers were irrefutable, but Edson had long recognized that statistics rarely capture the full complexity of a situation. The ridge itself was hardly imposing, a modest elevation of coral and volcanic rock, rising a mere 60 feet above the surrounding jungle, stretching roughly 1,000 yards from north to south. To military strategists poring over maps in Washington, it likely appeared insignificant. However, to the Marines entrenched along its slopes, it represented the razor-thin margin between American control of Henderson Field and utter defeat in the Pacific. The airstrip lay a mere 800 yards to the north, close enough that the men could discern the faint drone of aircraft engines igniting in the pre-dawn hours. Edson had meticulously arranged his forces with the calculated precision of a chess grandmaster playing for the highest stakes, his life and the lives of his men. The 1st Raider Battalion occupied the northern sector of the ridge, closest to Henderson Field, while the 1st Parachute Battalion extended along the southern approaches. Together they established overlapping fields of fire, effectively covering the jungle approaches. Nevertheless, Edson understood that firepower alone would not guarantee their survival. The Japanese had repeatedly demonstrated their willingness to endure staggering casualties to achieve their objectives, and Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi commanded a force 3 times the size of Edson's, stealthily advancing through the darkness. The Marines had endured over a month of grueling combat on Guadalcanal, and the jungle had imparted lessons that no training manual could adequately convey. The suffocating humidity transformed every piece of metal into a searing surface during the day, while at night, condensation slicked everything. Canvas rotted within weeks, and food spoiled within days, Men shed weight they could ill afford to lose and succumb to tropical diseases that sapped their strength. Yet, they had also learned to harness the jungle's unique acoustics to their advantage, keenly listening for the subtle sounds that betrayed enemy movement through the dense undergrowth. As Edson meticulously inspected his positions, he observed Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone meticulously adjusting the traverse mechanism on his Browning M1917 machine gun. This formidable weapon, a relic from the previous war, was water-cooled and weighed a hefty 41 pounds without its tripod. However, it possessed the capability to sustain a blistering rate of fire that could shred human flesh at ranges of up to 1,500 yards. Basilone had already distinguished himself in prior engagements, exhibiting the kind of unwavering competence under fire that separated seasoned Marines from the newly arrived replacements from the States. "How's your ammunition situation, Gunny?" Edson inquired, crouching beside the machine gun emplacement. "Enough to make them think twice about coming up this hill, Colonel," Basilone replied, his voice radiating the quiet confidence that Edson had come to rely upon. "Though I wouldn't mind having a few more belts if the Japanese decide to get serious about this." Private First Class Robert Mard was dug in a mere 20 yards to Basilone's left. His Springfield rifle was meticulously cleaned and loaded, its bayonet firmly affixed. The young Marine had arrived on Guadalcanal a mere 3 weeks prior, still bearing the somewhat soft demeanor of stateside training camps. However, the jungle had already begun its transformative work. His uniform hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes reflected the heightened alertness that stemmed from knowing that death could arrive without warning from any direction. The Japanese strategy, as Edson had gleaned from intelligence reports and captured documents, hinged on speed and shock. Kawaguchi's forces had been relentlessly pushing through the jungle for 3 days, following trails that only the most experienced guides could navigate in daylight. Their meticulously planned assault called for a coordinated night attack from 3 directions, designed to overwhelm the American positions through sheer weight of numbers and the psychological impact of engaging in combat under the cover of complete darkness. What the Japanese had failed to account for was the comprehensive defensive preparations that Edson had diligently implemented over the preceding week. Every potential approach to the ridge had been meticulously studied, measured, and pre-registered for artillery fire. The Marines had cleared fields of fire through the dense jungle undergrowth, creating carefully designed killing zones that would funnel attacking forces into predetermined corridors. Wire obstacles, though limited by supply shortages, had been strategically positioned to slow down and channel enemy troops into the most effective engagement ranges. The Marines also possessed intangible advantages that would not be reflected in any intelligence report that Kawaguchi might have received. Their training emphasized individual initiative and adaptability, qualities that proved invaluable in the chaos of night combat. Unlike their Japanese counterparts, who relied heavily on meticulously coordinated group tactics, American Marines were trained to fight effectively as individuals when larger formations broke down under fire. Stay with us to find out what happens next and see how the battle unfolds. We would be grateful for your like and subscription to our channel. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and what are your thoughts about this incredible historical event. As night enveloped the jungle, an unsettling shift occurred in the ambient sounds. The usual symphony of insects and nocturnal creatures gradually faded, replaced by an ominous silence that seasoned Marines instinctively recognized as a precursor to enemy engagement. Deep within the darkness below the ridge, thousands of Japanese soldiers were stealthily maneuvering into position, their movement creating a palpable disturbance that even the jungle's wild life could sense. Edson meticulously patrolled the defensive lines, engaging in hushed conversations with squad leaders and verifying ammunition supplies. The Marines possessed roughly 200 rounds per rifleman, bolstered by grenades, mortars, and the formidable machine guns that would serve as the linchpin of their defense. While not an overabundance, it was ample for men trained to make every shot count, a skill honed through rigorous training and hard-won experience. The colonel's radio suddenly crackled with reports from observation posts strategically positioned throughout the jungle. Japanese forces had been detected advancing along 3 distinct routes, confirming the intelligence estimates of a multifaceted assault. The enemy was now so close that individual voices could occasionally be discerned through the dense undergrowth, uttering clipped Japanese military commands that betrayed their proximity. At precisely 11:45 p.m., the first Japanese mortar rounds began to rain down upon the ridge. The explosions were sporadic and lacked coordination, suggesting that Kawaguchi's forces were still in the process of deploying and calibrating their indirect fire weapons. However, the shelling achieved its intended psychological effect, signaling to the Marines that the anticipated battle was finally imminent, a moment they had been preparing for with intense focus and determination. Edson assumed his station at the command post, a shallow trench fortified with sandbags and situated at the ridge's highest point. From this strategic vantage point, he could survey the entire expanse of his defensive line and maintain crucial radio contact with Henderson Field. The airstrip's artillery batteries stood ready to provide fire support, their guns preloaded and precisely aimed at designated target zones, a testament to meticulous planning and preparation. Suddenly, the jungle erupted in a cacophony of chaos as the vanguard of Japanese infantry surged from the tree line, their battle cries reverberating across the ridge as they charged headlong toward the Marine positions. The moment of truth had arrived. The real test of the Marines' resolve and preparedness was about to commence. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The initial wave of Japanese infantry burst forth from the jungle's edge. Resembling a human avalanche, their voices united in the traditional banzai cry that had instilled fear in Allied forces throughout the Pacific theater. However, as they surged up the ridge's slopes, they encountered an unexpected obstacle that Major General Kawaguchi had failed to account for in his tactical calculations. The Marines stood firm. They neither faltered nor retreated. Instead, they unleashed a barrage of disciplined and precise fire that transformed the hillside into a devastating kill zone, a testament to their training and unwavering resolve. Basilon's machine gun commenced its lethal work at a range of 800 yards. The heavy projectiles from the Browning sliced through the advancing Japanese ranks with ruthless efficiency, like a scythe cutting through a field of wheat. The weapon's water-cooled barrel enabled sustained fire that bolt-action rifles simply could not match, and Basilone had strategically positioned his gun to enfilade the primary approach route. Each burst unleashed 5 to 7 rounds downrange in less than 2 seconds, and at that distance, every round that found its mark proved fatal. The Japanese assault had been meticulously planned according to established infantry doctrine, emphasizing speed and shock action. Kawaguchi's forces were expected to rapidly close the distance to the American positions, utilizing the cover of darkness and overwhelming numbers to compensate for their limited firepower. However, the ridge's terrain presented unforeseen challenges that no amount of pre-battle reconnaissance could have fully revealed. The Marines, in contrast, had spent weeks meticulously studying every approach, every contour in the ground, every potential piece of cover that an attacking force might exploit. Private Mard peered down the sights of his Springfield rifle and squeezed the trigger, witnessing a Japanese soldier stumble and collapse 50 yards downslope from his position. The young Marine smoothly operated the bolt action, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round with the mechanical precision that months of rigorous training had ingrained into his muscle memory. Surrounding him, the distinctive crack of American rifles created a steady percussion, punctuating the deeper roar of the machine guns, a symphony of destruction orchestrated by well-trained and disciplined defenders. Kawaguchi's fundamental misjudgment lay in his misunderstanding of American defensive doctrine. Japanese military philosophy emphasized the spiritual superiority of the attack, the unwavering belief that determined infantry could overcome any obstacle through sheer force of will. American doctrine, conversely, prioritized maximizing firepower and establishing interlocking fields of fire designed to decimate attacking forces before they could close to effective range. The Marines had transformed the ridge into a formidable fortress, meticulously designed to exploit every advantage that modern weaponry could provide. The Japanese forces advancing up the southern approaches encountered their first devastating surprise when American mortar rounds began to explode among their ranks. The Marines had pre-plotted every likely avenue of approach, meticulously measuring distances and calculating firing solutions during daylight hours when they could operate without fear of enemy observation. Now, under the cover of darkness, those calculations yielded significant results as high-explosive shells detonated with lethal accuracy among the densely packed Japanese infantry. Corporal Watanabe led his squad through the dense undergrowth, desperately seeking cover as American bullets whizzed overhead and mortar fragments rained down through the jungle canopy. The seasoned, non-commissioned officer had participated in successful night assaults across the Pacific. But this was different. The American fire was too precise, too sustained, and too well coordinated to be the product of panicked defenders firing aimlessly into the darkness. These Marines were firing with purpose, and Japanese soldiers were falling faster than they could advance. The stark tactical reality that Kawaguchi was only beginning to grasp became painfully evident as his second wave emerged from the jungle to find the ground ahead of them littered with the bodies of their comrades. The Marines had not only repelled the initial assault, but had done so with such devastating efficiency that the attacking forces were already losing cohesion. Japanese squad and platoon leaders, the experienced non-commissioned officers who held their units together in combat, were being systematically targeted and eliminated by American marksmen who had learned to identify targets of opportunity by observing the muzzle flashes and movement patterns of the attacking infantry. From his strategic command post, Edson meticulously observed the unfolding combat, receiving updates from his subordinate leaders and coordinating artillery bombardments from Henderson Field. The gravity of the situation was clear to the colonel. This was no mere probing attack. Kawaguchi had committed a substantial contingent to this offensive, and their relentless determination indicated their belief in the ridge's pivotal importance. However, Edson also discerned critical flaws in the Japanese strategy, errors that his well-trained and equipped Marines were poised to exploit. The American artillery emplacements at Henderson Field had meticulously pre-registered target coordinates encompassing the ridge's vicinity. These artillery pieces now unleashed a barrage of devastating firepower. The 155mm howitzers delivered high explosive projectiles with remarkable precision, guided by forward observers who maintained seamless communication with the gun crews throughout the preliminary bombardment. Each detonation created a lethal fragmentation zone, capable of disabling enemy combatants across a 40-yard radius, with the guns maintaining a rapid firing rate of 4 rounds per minute. The Japanese employed tactics centered on infiltration and close-quarters combat, but the terrain surrounding the ridge offered scant concealment for large troop formations. The Marines had meticulously cleared fields of fire extending 300 yards in all directions, establishing deadly kill zones where attacking forces would be exposed to concentrated fire from numerous vantage points. Even under the cloak of darkness, the muzzle flashes emanating from Japanese firearms betrayed their positions to American gunners, expertly trained to engage targets based on sound and visual signatures. Stay with us to watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The third wave of the Japanese assault encountered an even more refined defense as Edson initiated strategies that would become standard operating procedure for American forces throughout the Pacific Campaign. Rather than simply maintaining static defensive positions, Marine squads initiated limited counterattacks, strategically designed to disrupt Japanese formations before they could effectively coordinate their assaults. These small unit actions, spearheaded by seasoned non-commissioned officers such as Basilone, effectively prevented the enemy from establishing firing positions within effective range of the ridge. Kawaguchi's forces found themselves ensnared in a tactical quagmire for which their training had left them unprepared. The Americans were not adhering to the patterns of engagement that Japanese intelligence had documented in previous encounters. Instead of retreating under duress or collapsing under determined assault, the Marines exhibited a level of professional competence that transformed every Japanese advantage into a critical vulnerability. The consistent and unrelenting rate of fire maintained by American weaponry proved decisive as the battle entered its second hour. Japanese infantry, primarily armed with bolt-action rifles, found themselves outgunned by Marines, who not only possessed superior firepower, but also the tactical acumen to effectively deploy that firepower. The Browning machine guns, bolstered by mortars and artillery, established an interlocking web of destruction that no amount of individual bravery could surmount. By midnight, Kawaguchi's offensive had completely lost its momentum, his forces scattered and disarrayed across the jungle approaches to the ridge. The general faced a critical decision that would determine the course of the battle: either continue feeding his remaining troops into what had become a killing ground, or concede that his initial strategy had failed and attempt to devise new tactics to counter an enemy who refused to conform to Japanese expectations of American combat capabilities. The jungle was enveloped in an unsettling silence as the fourth Japanese assault wave disintegrated into scattered groups of survivors, crawling back through the dense undergrowth. Kawaguchi had committed over 1,500 soldiers to the attacks, and the ridge remained firmly under American control. But the general was far from defeated. In the pre-dawn darkness of September 14th, he prepared to wager everything on a final coordinated assault that would either shatter the Marine defenses or annihilate what remained of his command. Edson moved through his lines, assessing ammunition reserves and redistributing his forces to fill the gaps created by 4 hours of continuous combat in his defensive perimeter. The Marines had performed admirably, but they were visibly showing the effects of sustained action. Private Mard had expended over 100 rounds from his Springfield rifle, exceeding the ammunition expenditure of many Marines during an entire month of training. His shoulder throbbed from the rifle's recoil, and his hands trembled slightly as he instinctively reloaded his 8-round clips in the darkness. The colonel's primary concern revolved around ammunition for the machine guns. Bassilone's crew had fired nearly 3,000 rounds, replacing barrels twice to prevent overheating, despite the weapon's water-cooled design. The gunnery sergeant reported a remaining supply of approximately 500 rounds, sufficient for another sustained engagement, but inadequate for a prolonged battle. Similar reports emanated from other machine gun emplacements positioned along the ridge, with each crew rationing their remaining ammunition while maintaining their designated sectors of fire. Kawaguchi had learned from his previous setbacks, and his final assault reflected a more sophisticated understanding of American defensive strengths. Rather than launching mass frontal assaults that played into the Marines' advantages, he divided his remaining troops into smaller infiltration units, tasked with penetrating the American perimeter and launching attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. The Japanese would forego the psychological impact of banzai charges in favor of tactics that might actually succeed against disciplined defenders. The shift in Japanese strategy became evident as Marine listening posts began reporting movement from sectors that had been quiet during the earlier assaults. Small groups of enemy soldiers were attempting to maneuver around the flanks of the American position, utilizing ravines and dense vegetation to conceal their movements. These infiltrators carried light weaponry and grenades, intending to approach the Marine positions closely enough to neutralize key assets such as machine guns and mortars through surprise attacks. As the sun began to set, the Japanese forces, under the command of General Kawaguchi, launched a series of surprise attacks, hoping to overwhelm the American defenses through sheer audacity. Edson, keenly aware of the precariousness of his position, swiftly reacted by redeploying his reserve forces, stationed behind the main defensive line, to directly confront and nullify these infiltration attempts. These Marines, battle-hardened and possessing a wealth of combat experience, were particularly adept at operating autonomously in small, highly effective units. They navigated the dense jungle terrain with the stealth and precision of seasoned hunters, leveraging their intimate knowledge of the environment to intercept the advancing Japanese forces before they could pose a significant threat to the ridge's defenses. The ensuing combat was markedly different from the earlier, more conventional assaults. Individual Marines found themselves locked in intense, close-quarters engagements with Japanese soldiers who had managed to penetrate within a mere 30 yards of critical defensive positions. One such instance saw Private Mard, alert and vigilant, detect movement in the dense undergrowth to his left. He swiftly turned to face the threat, spotting a Japanese soldier emerging from concealment, grenade in hand, poised to strike. In a split-second reaction, the young Marine's rifle barked, and the enemy soldier crumpled to the ground, the grenade rolling harmlessly down the slope, detonating harmlessly amidst the trees below. Meanwhile, Gunnery Sergeant Basilon's position came under intense pressure as a Japanese squad managed to advance within grenade range of his machine gun emplacement. Basilon and his crew fiercely defended their position, resorting to pistols and rifle butts, as the enemy soldiers desperately attempted to overrun their sandbagged stronghold. In a particularly harrowing moment, one Japanese soldier actually reached the machine gun itself before Basilon, with lightning-fast reflexes, neutralized him with a burst from his Thompson submachine gun, the lifeless body falling across the weapon's tripod. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Where are you from? And what do you think about the video topic? The ferocity of this close-quarters combat created a state of near-total chaos along the defensive perimeter. However, it also exposed a critical flaw in Kawaguchi's tactical approach. By dispersing his forces into smaller infiltration groups, the general had inadvertently sacrificed the crucial mass and momentum necessary for a successful breakthrough. Instead of focusing his remaining strength against a single vulnerable point in the American line, he had diffused his forces across multiple objectives, thus enabling the Marines to systematically engage and defeat each group individually. Throughout the night, American artillery continued to play a pivotal role, delivering devastating barrages against the attacking Japanese forces. However, the artillery's effectiveness was now amplified by forward observers who were often positioned mere yards away from enemy positions. This close proximity to the combat zone made fire missions exceedingly dangerous, demanding impeccable timing and precise navigation to prevent friendly fire incidents. The shell bursts momentarily illuminated the jungle in brief, hellish flashes, revealing Japanese soldiers desperately seeking cover amidst the tangled roots and fallen logs. The tactical landscape had evolved into a scenario perfectly suited to American training and equipment. The Marines excelled in small unit actions that demanded individual initiative and adaptability. Their weaponry was engineered for sustained fire and close-range accuracy, providing them with a distinct advantage in the brutal close-quarters fighting. Crucially, their doctrine emphasized aggressive counterattacks, preventing enemy forces from consolidating gains or establishing stable firing positions. As the first light of dawn began to break, the battle's character underwent another transformation. Kawaguchi's infiltration tactics had failed to achieve a breakthrough, and the approaching daylight would expose his remaining forces to the devastating firepower of American positions that commanded excellent fields of observation. The general now faced the grim prospect of continuing his attacks in broad daylight against defenders who had already demonstrated their ability to inflict catastrophic casualties on his forces. The Japanese forces began their withdrawal shortly after 5 a.m. their movements concealed by a poorly coordinated and largely ineffective mortar barrage. Marine observers, peering through field glasses, watched as scattered groups of enemy soldiers retreated through the dense jungle, abandoning equipment and wounded comrades in their desperate attempt to escape the deadly killing ground around the ridge. Edson, ever mindful of the defensive nature of his mission, ordered his forces to maintain their positions and avoid any pursuit operations that might expose them to ambush or lead them into prepared enemy positions. He understood that his primary objective was to defend the ridge, and he had accomplished that mission with a tactical victory that exceeded all reasonable expectations. His 800 Marines had not only held their ground against overwhelming odds, but had also effectively decimated an enemy force 3 times their size. The aftermath of the battle laid bare the full extent of the Japanese defeat. Reconnaissance patrols meticulously counted over 700 enemy bodies scattered across the approaches to the ridge, with countless more wounded soldiers evacuated during the retreat. In stark contrast, American casualties numbered fewer than 50 killed and wounded, a ratio that would have seemed utterly implausible to military analysts studying the preliminary force dispositions. Kawaguchi's failure at the ridge effectively crippled Japanese offensive capabilities on Guadalcanal and marked the beginning of a strategic shift that would define the remainder of the Pacific War. The Marines had conclusively demonstrated that disciplined defenders with superior firepower could defeat numerically superior attackers, regardless of their reputation for fanatical courage. More importantly, they had proven that American forces could adapt their tactics to exploit enemy weaknesses while maximizing their own technological and training advantages. The ridge, forever to be known as Edson's Ridge, had become the final resting place of Japanese hopes for victory on Guadalcanal. The 800 Marines who had tenaciously defended it had proven that superior numbers meant nothing in the face of superior preparation, training, and leadership. As the first rays of dawn painted the jungle canopy in hues of gold and green, Edson surveyed the battlefield that stretched below the ridge. What he witnessed defied every prediction that staff officers had made about Japanese resilience and fighting capability. Bodies lay strewn across the approaches in clusters that told the story of each failed assault, their positions marking the high water mark of what had been one of the most concentrated enemy offensives in the Pacific War. The silence that had descended upon the ridge possessed an almost supernatural quality, broken only by the distant calls of tropical birds resuming their morning routines. Private Mard, after 6 long hours, emerged from his fighting position, his legs unsteady as circulation returned to limbs that had been cramped in the same defensive posture throughout the night. The young Marine gazed out across the killing field with the hollow-eyed stare of someone who had witnessed industrialized death on a scale that no training exercise could ever replicate. Japanese equipment lay scattered among the bodies, rifles with their distinctive long bayonets, light mortars that had never found their range, and canvas packs spilling personal effects across the jungle floor. The humid air hung heavy as the first rays of dawn pierced the dense canopy, illuminating the carnage strewn across the jungle floor. Gunnery Sergeant Basilon meticulously cleaned his machine gun, diligently swabbing the barrel to eliminate the carbon residue left over from expending nearly 4,000 rounds. The weapon had functioned perfectly throughout the intense combat, its water-cooled design preventing the overheating that would have rendered it inoperable during the battle's most critical moments. The experienced gunnery sergeant, however, knew that mechanical dependability was secondary to the tactical acumen required to effectively employ weaponry. He had resoundingly demonstrated that American machine gun doctrine, when correctly implemented, could inflict devastating casualties on attacking infantry. As Marine patrols ventured out across the battlefield to gather intelligence and assess enemy losses, the magnitude of the Japanese defeat became starkly apparent. Colonel Kawaguchi had committed the equivalent of 3 full battalions to his assault on the ridge, a force of approximately 2,500 men, comprising some of his most seasoned combat units. Of these, fewer than 800 remained capable of organized resistance, with many wounded or separated from their units during the chaotic retreat. What made this rout particularly damaging to Japanese strategic objectives was the high caliber of the troops annihilated. These were not inexperienced recruits or secondary garrison forces, but veteran infantrymen who had participated in successful campaigns throughout the Pacific. Many of Kawaguchi's soldiers had previously fought in the conquest of the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines, gaining battlefield experience that Japanese military planners deemed essential for offensive operations against American troops. The loss of such experienced soldiers dealt a blow to Japanese military capabilities that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation on Guadalcanal. Edson's tactical triumph resonated far beyond the immediate battlefield, influencing high-level military strategy on both sides of the Pacific. For the Americans, the successful defense of the ridge proved that Japanese forces were not invincible. It showed that superior numbers and fanatical determination could be overcome through professional skill and the effective application of firepower. This valuable lesson would shape American tactical doctrine for the remainder of the war, encouraging commanders to have confidence in their training and equipment when facing seemingly insurmountable odds. The Japanese response to this major setback exposed fundamental flaws in their strategic thinking, which had been previously masked by earlier victories against less prepared adversaries. Stay with us to watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Kawaguchi's after-action reports attributed his failure to inadequate artillery support and insufficient time for reconnaissance. However, these excuses failed to address the central issue. Japanese infantry tactics had been devised for campaigns against opponents who lacked the firepower and tactical sophistication of American Marine units. No amount of additional preparation could have overcome these basic doctrinal limitations. American intelligence officers, during interrogations of captured Japanese soldiers, discovered that Kawaguchi's forces had been led to expect minimal resistance from demoralized American defenders who would collapse under a determined assault. This fundamental misjudgment of Marine capabilities reflected broader Japanese misconceptions about American fighting ability, misconceptions that would prove incredibly costly throughout the Pacific War. The long-held belief that Western soldiers lacked the spiritual fortitude for sustained combat had been decisively disproven. The strategic ramifications of the battle extended beyond immediate military considerations, impacting the broader course of the Pacific War. Henderson Field remained in American control, providing a vital base for air operations that would gradually cut off Japanese supply lines to their remaining forces on Guadalcanal. Unable to reinforce or resupply their positions, Japanese commanders faced the daunting prospect of conducting a defensive campaign with inadequate resources against an enemy who controlled both the sea approaches and the airspace above the island. For the Marines who fought on the ridge, the victory validated training methods and tactical doctrines that many had questioned during their months of preparation back in the United States. The emphasis on individual marksmanship, small unit tactics, and the aggressive use of supporting weapons had proven effective against an enemy renowned for military prowess. More importantly, they had demonstrated, both to themselves and to observers throughout the Pacific, that American forces could not only match Japanese combat effectiveness, but could surpass it when properly led and equipped. The human cost of the victory, while relatively light compared to other battles in the Pacific theater, still represented irreplaceable losses for units that had no immediate prospects of receiving replacements. 43 Marines were killed during the engagement, and another 97 were wounded seriously enough to require medical evacuation. Each casualty represented years of training and combat experience that could not be easily replaced, underscoring the importance of tactical victories that achieved strategic objectives while minimizing friendly losses. Edson's personal leadership during the battle became a compelling case study in small unit command, analyzed and emulated throughout the Marine Corps for decades to come. His decision to allow Japanese forces to surround his position had initially appeared to be tactical suicide to observers who failed to grasp the defensive advantages that the ridge provided. By forcing the enemy to attack uphill against fortified positions, he had maximized the effectiveness of American firepower, while minimizing Japanese advantages in numbers and close combat skills. The ridge, forever bearing Edson's name, represented far more than just another tactical victory in the long and arduous struggle for control of the Pacific. It marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in the balance of military effectiveness that would define the remainder of the war against Japan. American forces had proven that superior training, equipment, and leadership could overcome any advantage in numbers or fighting spirit that their enemies might possess. The hard-won lessons learned in the jungles of Guadalcanal would resound across every battlefield, from the Solomon Islands to the shores of Japan itself, carried forward by Marines who had witnessed the birth of American tactical supremacy in the Pacific theater of operations. The information reaching Japanese headquarters on the morning of September 14th presented a situation that Kawaguchi struggled to accept. His brigade, which had boasted a strength of over 3,000 soldiers just days prior, was no longer a cohesive fighting unit. Reports from unit commanders who were still in contact indicated casualty rates exceeding 60%, with many companies reduced to fewer than 20 operational soldiers. The 35th Infantry Brigade, once highly regarded within the Imperial Japanese Army, had been decimated in a single night of intense combat on the ridge. Survivors of the assault were scattered throughout the jungle in small groups, many burdened by wounded comrades, which slowed their retreat and exposed them to American pursuit. Japanese military strategy had never adequately addressed the complexities of large-scale retreats, as it was premised on the expectation that victory or death were the only acceptable outcomes for imperial forces. Consequently, Kawaguchi was now faced with the unprecedented challenge of evacuating the remnants of his command, while attempting to maintain enough organizational structure to prevent a complete collapse. Captain Suzuki, one of Kawaguchi's few remaining company commanders, had observed the final assault from a strategically positioned observation point that provided a clear view of the American defensive line. His report to brigade headquarters detailed Marine positions that maintained disciplined fire, even as Japanese soldiers approached within 20 yards of their fortified positions. Suzuki noted that the Americans never appeared to panic or lose tactical coherence, responding to each Japanese advance with coordinated counterfire that efficiently neutralized the attackers. Their unwavering resolve and calculated responses highlighted a level of tactical proficiency that was both unexpected and deeply concerning. American intelligence officers, monitoring Japanese radio communications, detected growing signs of desperation in the enemy's transmissions, as unit commanders struggled to account for their dispersed forces. Intercepts revealed that Kawaguchi had lost contact with over half of his subordinate units, many of which had been so thoroughly destroyed that no survivors remained to report their fate. Those units that managed to maintain communication conveyed a consistent narrative of devastating losses and complete tactical failure. The ramifications of this defeat extended far beyond the immediate battlefield, impacting Japanese strategic planning throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. High Command had designated Kawaguchi's brigade as the vanguard of a larger offensive aimed at recapturing Henderson Field and neutralizing American air power in the region. The failure of this assault necessitated a fundamental reevaluation of Japanese capabilities and exposed a significant underestimation of American defensive strength by Tokyo's military planners. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. For the Marines positioned on the ridge, the scale of their victory became evident as patrols returned, with reports of enemy equipment and casualties strewn across several square miles of jungle. The sheer quantity of abandoned Japanese equipment painted a vivid picture of an army in full retreat, rifles discarded to facilitate faster withdrawal, mortars abandoned when their crews were killed or wounded, and personal belongings scattered along every trail leading away from the battlefield. Intelligence specialists meticulously cataloged the captured weapons and documents, constructing a comprehensive understanding of Japanese tactical organization and equipment, which would prove invaluable in future engagements. Private Mard accompanied one of the reconnaissance patrols that ventured beyond the immediate perimeter to assess the extent of Japanese losses. The sights he encountered during that patrol would be forever etched into his memory. The bodies of enemy soldiers lay in positions that narrated the story of each failed assault, their equipment and weapons scattered in patterns that reflected the intensity of American defensive fire. Many Japanese positions bore the unmistakable marks of direct hits from artillery or mortar rounds, with entire squads obliterated in single explosions that left craters surrounded by debris and human remains. Bazelon oversaw the redistribution of ammunition from Japanese sources, carefully examining captured rifles and machine guns to evaluate their capabilities and potential battlefield applications. The Japanese weapons displayed excellent craftsmanship, but revealed design philosophies that differed markedly from American approaches. While American weapons emphasized sustained fire and mechanical reliability, Japanese designs prioritized accuracy and conservation of ammunition, reflecting divergent tactical doctrines and manufacturing capabilities. The strategic implications of the battle reverberated through both military hierarchies, as senior commanders sought to comprehend the events that had transpired on the ridge. American generals saw validation of training programs and tactical doctrines that had been developed during peacetime but never fully tested under combat conditions. The emphasis on small unit leadership, individual marksmanship, and the coordinated deployment of supporting weapons had proven devastatingly effective against an enemy known for its military prowess. Japanese military leaders faced the more daunting task of explaining how elite infantry units had been routed by a numerically inferior enemy fighting from fortified positions. Traditional Japanese military thinking emphasized spiritual strength and aggressive tactics as the keys to victory, concepts that had proven inadequate against American firepower and defensive expertise. The defeat compelled a painful acknowledgement that technological superiority and professional training could overcome advantages in numbers and fighting spirit. Kawaguchi's personal fate exemplified the broader consequences of the tactical disaster. The general, once regarded as one of Japan's most capable field commanders, saw his career effectively terminated by the debacle on Guadalcanal. His superiors in Tokyo viewed the defeat as evidence of inadequate leadership and poor tactical judgment, criticisms that overlooked the fundamental flaws in Japanese doctrine and strategic assessment that had made the disaster almost inevitable. The subsequent accounting of medical conditions following the confrontation shed further light on the extent of the Japanese setback. American medics, while providing aid to captured combatants, found that a large number were afflicted with both malnutrition and tropical ailments. These conditions had significantly weakened their ability to effectively engage in combat. The Japanese support network, already strained by long and tenuous supply routes, coupled with relentless aerial assaults by the Americans, was demonstrably unable to sustain their fighting forces at peak operational readiness during sustained operations in challenging and unforgiving terrains. While the American losses were a source of deep sorrow for the families and military units affected, they nonetheless represented a remarkably advantageous exchange rate, thereby affirming the tactical choices implemented during the course of the battle. The 43 Marines who perished and the 97 who sustained injuries had inflicted casualties on the Japanese forces at a ratio exceeding 20-1. This disparity underscored both the inherent defensive strengths offered by the ridge's terrain and the enhanced efficacy of American weaponry and combat strategies. The political repercussions stemming from this triumph extended beyond mere military considerations, profoundly influencing both American morale and Japanese strategic assessments throughout the Pacific theater. News of the successful defense reached the United States at a critical juncture, when public sentiment regarding the nation's prospects in the Pacific War remained uncertain. The Marines' achievement offered tangible proof that Japanese forces could indeed be overcome through meticulous planning and proficient execution, thereby bolstering sustained backing for the massive military buildup that would ultimately prove decisive. The ridge, which had served as the backdrop for this pivotal shift in the Pacific conflict, stood in quietude under the afternoon sun, its slopes bearing the scars of battle, but no longer serving as a contested zone between opposing armies. Stay with us, dear viewers, as we delve into the concluding segments of this compelling narrative. Your continued attention enhances our community and helps us bring more such stories to light. We would be grateful for your like and subscription, which enable us to continue creating content that informs and inspires. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and your thoughts on the video's topic. For the 800 Marines who resolutely defended their position against overwhelming numbers, the victory served as a confirmation of the principles of warfare, leadership, and the potential of well-trained soldiers fighting in support of a cause they deeply believed in.